All right, please turn in your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 21. And tonight, as chapter 21 is 15 verses, we'll be covering 2 chapters. At least that's the intent. So, a couple things before we dig in. We dealt with this issue to some level last week, but we're going to see it again tonight in the text, and that is these gray areas where you have a command of God that maybe is overruled by another. When God tells us to be truthful, right? Thou shalt not bear false witness, which probably in context and according to the language means not lying while you're in court, but nonetheless, it means, we're supposed to be truthful at all times, not just while we're in court. But last week we saw how Jonathan was somewhat deceptive with his father in dealing with David and trying to scope him out and see whether his father truly did want to murder David. But David's wife, Michal, wasn't just deceptive. She just out and out lied. And so we have this moral conflict where a person isn't necessarily telling the truth, but there's a greater cause in why they're doing it, and they're preserving a life in these situations. And mercy outweighs law in these matters. And I think that there are times in our life where we have situations where we know exactly, I know a scripture that speaks exactly to this issue and I can exactly know what to do. But I don't think that's really the norm. I think the norm is that we have to use the Spirit, we have to use the good mind that the Lord gave us, and the wealth of knowledge that we have of Scripture to make our decisions. Right? We have to weigh all things because we're not necessarily in a situation of, say, stealing. We have to weigh it out. Is this deal that I'm getting, say that I'm going to get a deal and it's kind of, I'm getting it for less than, but it's kind of through the back alley, but I don't really see anything illegal here. We're not, so should I do this, right? So not everything is cut and dried, and we're going to see that tonight as we see David fleeing from King Saul, and King Saul continues in his paranoia of David, and he takes it to an extreme level in chapter 22 tonight. And I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, so to speak, so I probably better stop and just get into the text. So I was going to ask for Gabe to read, but since he's eating, Gabe, I wasn't. Just teasing you, because I'm awful. All right, so if we could get someone, a volunteer, to read chapter 21, verses 1 through 6. And then when we're done reading that, Mama,
I'll read.
You're going to read?
Yeah.
All right, then Terry, would you open us in prayer after she reads? Okay.
David went to the town of Nob to see
Ahimelech?
Ahimelech, the priest. Ahimelech trembled when he saw him. "Why are you alone?" he asked. "Why is no one with you?" "The king has sent me on a private matter," David said. "He told me not to tell anyone why I'm here. I have told my men where to meet me later. Now what is there to eat? Give me 5 loaves of bread or anything else you have." "We don't have any regular bread," the priest replied, "but there is holy bread, which you can have if your young men have not slept with any women recently." "Don't worry," David replied. "I never allow my men to be with women when we are on a campaign. And since they stay clean, even on ordinary trips, how much more on this one? Since there is no one other food available, the priest gave him the holy bread, the bread of the presence that was placed before the Lord in the tabernacle. It had just been replaced that day with fresh bread.
Thank you. Terry?
Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this class tonight, God. We thank you for everything and everybody that's in this room and those that couldn't make it, God. We ask that you bless them. For tonight's class, just open the scriptures for us. Show us what we need to see. Let's follow how you teach us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you. This is David, at this point, has fled from Saul and went to Samuel. Saul sent men after David. They couldn't retrieve David. The Spirit of the Lord came upon them, and they were overtaken by the Spirit. They were not able to carry out their duties. Saul takes action and chases after David. And this same thing happens to Saul, only to an extended level, in that Saul is laying all day and all night naked before Samuel, prophesying. The Hebrew word naked there could mean that he had on his underclothes. I'm hoping that he did, but, you know, 'cause especially if he was outside, because when you got parts that haven't been in the sun, like ever, and you lay out for more than an hour, you're not feeling good for a while. You're pretty burned out, right? Most of us are anyway. Saul, then, with the Lord disabling, so to speak, Saul for that day, the full day, that gives David time to flee and create some distance. And he does. He doesn't go real far. He goes to this town called Nob. And Nob, at this point, has replaced Shiloh for where the priests reside. Not sure, not completely certain if the Ark of the Covenant is there, but the high priest does reside at this point in Nob, and that is Ahimelech. And we are going to see also in these texts, we are going to see God's faithfulness, but not in a way that we expect, I believe, in a way that we would rather have him, try to let him off the hook. You don't need to be faithful to that. Because earlier we saw in chapter 2 with Eli, the high priest, and if you remember, his sons were anything but godly, and Eli did nothing about it, and the Lord sent a prophet to warn them. They didn't change. The Lord then spoke through Samuel, and this was the first time Samuel ever prophesied. He had to go to his caretaker and mentor and tell him, this is God's judgment against you and your family line. And your sons are going to die, and everybody in their family line is going to die with the exception of one man at the sword of others. We're going to see that prophecy come true tonight. God is faithful. When he says something's going to happen, it's going to happen. If you ask me, hey, could I get off the hook on that one? I said, yeah, it's all good, right? We want the promises that are good, right? But his promises are true. Whether they're pleasant or not. So his promise of eternity in heaven with him is true to us. That if we believe, we will not perish. But see, that leaves the other part. What about those who don't believe? Well, God is faithful to his word. He is not going to make the people who don't want to be with him for eternity. And they won't be there. And that's tragic. But there is not going to be anybody in heaven that didn't want to be there. And there won't be anybody in hell that didn't choose it by rejecting the Lord. So we see that the Lord is faithful always. He is always faithful. The scripture tells us that he is not a man that he should lie. So, and it's not just men that lie. So, chapter 21. Then David came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech came to meet David trembling and said to him, "Why are you alone and no one with you?" You remember earlier when Samuel showed up in, I believe it was Bethlehem, and he was by himself, and the elders came out and they were trembling. "Why are you here by yourself?" Because these are very important men. It'd be if President Trump walked in. And we look outside, there's no Secret Service around. That's not right. These men do not travel by themselves, right? If the governor came, he wouldn't come by himself. He would have security here, right? So when this priest, Ahimelech, sees David, and David's by himself, he doesn't know what's going on, but he knows something's not right. Something is out of the norm. And here, David is deceitful. And interestingly, none of the commentators dealt with this, because I kind of see David as struggling and not necessarily making the right decisions here as he's fleeing. He remains faithful to the Lord, but not all of his decisions, I think, are well thought out. I can't say that if somebody was seeking my life to this level and I was truly running, not walking, not driving, but running, for my life, I may not have the best decision-making process in place. I give David some grace on that. So David, verse 2 says to Ahimelech the priest, "The king charged me with a matter and said to me, 'Let no one know anything about the matter of which I send you, and of which I have charged you.'" And then he goes on further to say, "I have made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place." So I'm alone now, but I have a group of people with me. I'm meeting up with them. Interestingly, some of the commentators said that, there's really no evidence in this script passage that he did have a group of people that he was meeting with. But Jesus spoke of it in Matthew and in Mark when he refers to David eating the consecrated bread. He says David and his men. So whether he had 5 or whether he had 50, I don't know, but he wasn't alone. Right? When the Lord makes a comment on the scripture, we have an accurate commentary, and we can take that. We can stake our firm belief in that. So verse 3, David goes on to say, "Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever is here." And the priest answered David, "I have no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread, if the young men have kept themselves from women." So David is looking for food. He's on the run. He knows he's going to be on the run. He doesn't know where it's safe. He doesn't know if it's safe to talk to this priest. So he's deceptive with him. See, remember when Saul split off from listening to Samuel, and then we saw after that Saul had a priest with him, Ahijah. He had Ahijah with him. Well, Ahijah is Ahimelech's brother. So David, he's not sure how to handle this. But it is interesting that in his time of need, where does he go? When he's really, really struggling, where first he goes to the prophet of God, now he goes to the high priest. That's who he's going to for help, right? He's not going home, he's not going to his old best friend. He's going to the people of the Lord. He doesn't know for sure whether he can trust Ahijah, so he gives this little story to him, and he says, give me 5 loaves, or whatever you got. Now, the bread of the presence was put out in 12, one for each tribe. And some of the commentators that I read said that 5, as the 5 fingers on the hand, could just have been a round number, meaning, give me what you got. And if that was 12, he's taken 12, but they could have referred to it as 5. Now we look at that and go, that is just whack, Bob. How can you say that? But see, our Western minds think different than these Eastern people did. We do. The more I'm studying and reading a lot. For the next study we're going to do, when we study about the Bible, and I'm studying about the types of literature and how these people read things, and our mind, we think differently than they did. It's drastically different. So whether or not he simply meant 5, hard to say. But what he did, what's very clear is, he didn't have any ordinary bread. He had the bread of the presence. And the bread of the presence was this, it's the bread before the face. Literally, that's how it's translated. That's the way they said it in their day. They didn't call it the bread of the presence. They call it the bread before the face. And it meant that it was before the face of God, because his presence was there in that tabernacle. And so he says the only way you're getting it is if your men have been kept from women. This is not to imply that there is anything wrong with marital relations in that matter. Okay? But the Lord is very clear that when you had relations, you were unclean for a period of time. He's not saying it's wrong. He's the one that's ordained it. He's the one that gave us these bodies. But he said, you're going to do that. You can't do this within 24 hours or until the next day. Period. That's just how it is. And so he tells the men, I'll give you the bread, but you can't be, quote, ceremonially unclean. And so here we see that there is a Levitical law that this bread was to be taken off as the fresh bread was put on and only be eaten by priests and not be taken home. It was to be eaten there in the holy place, in the tabernacle area, right? So we have this ceremonial law that is overridden by mercy for King David, for up-and-coming King David, I should say. And Jesus points that out when the Pharisees are barking at him for his disciples on the Sabbath day, plucking a head of grain and rubbing it between their hands to get the chaff off of it, and then eating the little kernels of grain. They're saying, what are you guys doing? You're working on the Sabbath. That's really not a whole lot of work to do that, but according to them, and Jesus didn't argue with them about whether or not it was work. He just pointed them back to this and said, haven't you read? You guys are the sharp ones in the scriptures. Haven't you read when David ate the consecrated bread? The needs of man outweigh these ceremonial things. These ceremonial things were to teach us about God, not to restrict and make our lives difficult. So David replies in verse 5, truly women have been kept from us as always when I go on an expedition. The vessels of the young men are holy, even when it is an ordinary journey. How much more today will their vessels be holy? So it's common practice, and it wasn't just common practice among the Jews. I know for different purposes, there are sports teams that say, you're not having relations within 24 hours of the game. and it has nothing to do with God. They believe that it has to do with the amount of testosterone in a man's body. You're going to perform better if you haven't had relations within 24 hours. There were other armies in the Eastern world at this time that had this same practice, and they didn't know the Lord. So it was a relatively common thing. So the priest gave him the holy bread, for there was no bread there but the bread of the presence, which is removed from before the Lord to be replaced by hot bread on the day it is taken away, and that's on the Sabbath day. Verse 7, let's see. We get someone to read verses 7 through 9.
I'll read it. Now one of Saul's servants was there that day, detained before the Lord. He was Doeg, the Edomite, Saul's chief shepherd. David asked Amalek, "Don't you have a spear or a sword here? I haven't brought my sword or any other weapon because the king's mission was urgent." The priest replied, The sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Eli, is here. It is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want it, take it. There is no sword here but that one. David said, There is none like it. Give it to me.
Thank you. So we're introduced to a new character here, Doeg, this Edomite, the chief of Saul's herdsmen. And we're not told much about him, just the fact that he's there. But we're gonna unfortunately hear more about him as this story unfolds. So verse 8, David says to Ahimelech, now that he's gotten food, he needs a weapon. And he says, do you have a spear or a sword at hand? For I brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me because the king's business required haste. That kind of doesn't fly with the men are clean, because they would have needed a period of time to make sure they were. So David's not really a practiced liar here, but apparently Ahimelech either isn't accustomed to wading through lies, or he just takes it as at face value. And so the priest said, the sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you struck down in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you will take it, if you will take that, take it, for there is none but that here. And David said, there is none like that, give it to me. So remember that the Philistines were the ones, now this is some years later obviously, so whether Israel had the Iron Age technology or not, the Philistines had that for quite some time, and Goliath, being the champion of the Philistine, probably would have had the best of the weapons. So he had a very nice instrument there. And then if somebody can read verses 10 through the end of the chapter, please.
I will.
Thank you.
That day David fled from Saul and went to Achish.
Achish?
What is it?
Achish?
Achish, king of Gath. But the servants of Achish said to him, isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't he the only one they sing about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. So he pretended to be insane in their presence, and while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. Achish, I keep messing up. Achish said to his servants, look at the man. He is insane. Why bring him to me? Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow here to carry on like this in front of me? Must this man come into my house?
Thank you.
Well,
So now David flees from Nob, and interestingly, he goes to the Philistines. He feels apparently safer in the country of the enemy than in his own country with his king after him. And he goes to Achish. These 5 cities of the Philistines each have their own king, so they're not necessarily like a big time king. They're a king of a smaller area. And apparently David thought that he wasn't well known enough that he'd be able to slip in there and offer his services to Achish as a soldier, mercenary, and be okay. And on day 1, the servants of Saul go, time out. That guy? That's David. He's the guy that's killed like a ton of our guys, right? And they know the song. They know the song that the ladies had sung. So apparently this has gone around for some period of time. And when David hears this, he takes it seriously. He's not like, this is going to blow over. No, he's like, I got to get out of here. And I got to get out of here right now. Not tonight, like right now. And so he's thinking on his feet, and he starts acting like he's crazy, like he'd lost his mind. And he's scratching on the door and probably making weird sounds, and says, and he had his spit running down his beard, and the king is like, we don't have enough nutcases around here. You gotta bring this guy in, and he wants to be in my, when it says here that he would come into my house, the terminology there is that he would join my forces, right? You think I want this guy as one of my guys? I don't care who he is, get him out of here. And with that, David's running. All right, so with that, I have asked Will to read chapter 34 of Psalms. We said that during his time that David was fleeing from Saul, he wrote a good portion of his Psalms. We're not going to read every one of those, but we are going to read some of them to get an idea of, during this time of struggle, we see David doing certain things. Well, we don't see the level of his spirituality. Listen to David's heart for God, what he knows about God. Remember, the only scriptures that were available at this time are the first 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That's it. He doesn't have the Psalms to know about writing Psalms, right? So, Will, would you read chapter 34 for us?
Okay. I will exalt the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. I will glory in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears.
Now, let me interrupt you just real briefly. And listen, each verse is a parallel, right? He says something in the first part of it, and then he changes it just slightly in the second part of it. It intensifies it. So as he's reading that, follow that. Listen to that, how he says it, and then David will intensify it with the second section. Go ahead, Will.
Those who look at him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. This poor man called the Lord and heard him. He saved him out of all his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Fear the Lord, you fear the Lord, you his holy people, for those who fear him lack nothing. The lions may grow weak and hungry, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. Come, my children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Whoever of you loves life and desires to see many good days, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from telling lies. Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and the ears are attentive to their cry. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil, to blot out their name from the earth. The righteous cries out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and saves those who are crushed in spirit. The righteous person may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from all. He protects all his bones. No one of them will be broken. Evil will slay the wicked. Evil will slay the wicked. The foes of the righteous will be condemned. The Lord will rescue his servants. No one who takes refuge in him will be condemned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Candace is going to read for us chapter 56. And both of these are written right after this event of him leaving Gath. So this is right at the time that he did these things. This is where David's mind is. Go ahead, Candace.
Be merciful to me, my God, for my enemies are in hot pursuit. All day long they press their attack. My adversaries pursue me all day long. In their pride, many are attacking me. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise. In God I trust and am not afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? All day long they twist my words. All their schemes are for my ruin. They conspire, they lurk, they watch my steps, hoping to take my life. Because of their wickedness, do not let them escape in your anger. God, bring the nations down. Record my misery, list my tears on your scroll. Are they not in your record? Then my enemies will turn back when I call for your help. By this I will know that God is for me. In God, whose word I praise, in the Lord, whose word I praise. In God I trust and am not afraid. What can man do to me? I am under vows to you, my God. I will present my thank offering to you, for you have delivered me from death and my feet from stumbling, that I may walk before God in the light of life.
Thank you. So that gives us a little peek into David, because we get a lot of insight into Saul by his actions, but in David, basically all we see is a little bit of conversation with his wife and with Jonathan, and we see him running, right? But this is where David's at mentally and emotionally and spiritually during this difficult time. All right, so chapter 22, if someone can read for us those first 5 verses.
Okay, David therefore departed thence, and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. And everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them. And there were with him about 400 men. And David went thence to Mizpah of Moab, and said to the king of Moab, Let my father and my mother, I pray thee, come forth and be with you, till I know what God will do for me. And he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the while that David was in the hold. And the prophet Gad said unto David, Abode not in the hold, depart and get thee to the land of Judah. Then David departed and came to the forest of Hareth.
Thank you. So David's on the run. He gets out of Gath with his skin, and he escapes to the cave of Adullam. And then his brothers and his father's whole household hear of it, and they go and they meet David out there. See, they're not safe either. If Saul is doing the things that he is doing and throwing a spear at his own son, there's a very likely chance that he's going to be coming after David's family as well. And so they're wise to leave their property and their goods behind and flee for their lives. In verse 2 now, we see people begin to gather around David. Right? It's, verse 2 says, and everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him, and he became a commander over them. And there were with him about 400 men. So with 400 men, unless you face an army, you're probably in pretty good shape wherever you go. Right? You're not going to run into a little band of 6 or 7 guys and they're going to give you some grief. Not with 400 guys. And these are the people who, for whatever reason, they're struggling in life. Things are difficult. They want to change. And they're willing to go on the road with David rather than remain in their situation. Verse 3 says, and David went from there to Mizpah of Moab. And then he says to the king there, please let my father and mother stay with you. So he's been on one side of Israel in Gath. Now he goes to the other side to Moab. This one makes sense. I'm not sure why he would have gone to Gath. To me, this one makes sense. If we remember, for those of us who were here for the study of Ruth, Ruth was a Moabitess. And she's David's grandmother. Right? Grandmother, great-grandmother. Yeah. Grandmother, yeah. So it makes sense to David, to me, to go to that family and to go to that country and seek refuge for his family. And he was pretty famous, so there's a good chance that these people would have known at this point who he is. They knew him by face in the land of the Philistines. At least in Moab, they might know when he begins to say, Ruth was my mother, and this was my great grandmother, and this is how the situation played out. And apparently, they took his family in and gave them refuge. Not sure exactly how long they were there. There's controversy I won't say controversy. There's opposing comments from the commentaries. I don't think it's all that critical as to how long his family was there in Moab. But in verse 5 now, the prophet Gad enters the scene. And he tells David, do not remain in the stronghold. Depart and go into the land of Judah. Okay, well, Adullam, the cave of Adullam, should have been in the land of Judah. So at this point, it must have been, it is a border town. And oftentimes these borders are flexible, depending on how strong the nation is. And when your nation is ran by a crazy king who's chasing after one of his own people, chances are good his borders are not secure. Because he's not protecting the nation, he's protecting his own self-interest. I thought it was coming after me. Did you hear it? I looked over and it was, all right. So then, at the end of verse 5, it says, David departed and he went to the forest of Areth. And that's further in to the land of Judah. And then this next section is actually the rest of the chapter. Is anybody into reading the rest of the chapter, or would like me to? Did I see a hand go up back there? Go ahead. So you get for scratching your head.
22, what verse?
From verse 6 through the end of the chapter.
When Saul heard that David and the men who were with him had been discovered, now Saul was staying in Gibeah under a tamarisk tree in Ramah with his spear in his hand and all his servants standing about him. Then Saul said to his servants who stood about him, "Hear now, you Benjamites. Will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you all captains of thousands and captains of hundreds? All of you have conspired against me, and there is no one who reveals to me that my son has made a covenant with the son of Jesse. And there is not one of you who is sorry for me or reveals to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait, as it is this day." Then answered Doeg the Edomite, who was set over the servants of Saul, and said, "I saw the son of Jesse going to Nob, to Ahimelech the son of Ahitub, and he inquired to the Lord for him, give him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. So the king sent to call Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, the priests who were in Nob, and they all came to the king. And Saul said, "Hear now, son of Ahitub." He answered, "Here I am, my lord." Then Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, in that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God for him that he should rise against me to lie in wait as it is this day?" So Ahimelech answered the king and said, "And who among all your servants is as faithful as David, who is the king's son-in-law, who goes at your bidding and is honorable in your house? Did I then begin to inquire of God for him? Far be it from me. Let not the king impute anything to his servant or to any in the house of my father. For your servant knew nothing of all of this, little or much." And the king said, "You shall surely die, Ahimelech, and you and all your father's house." Then the king said to the guards who stood about him, "Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew when he fled and did not tell it to me. But the servants of the king would not lift their hands to strike the priests of the Lord." And the king said to Doeg, "You turn and kill the priests." So Doeg the Edomite turned and struck the priests, and killed on that day 85 men who wore a linen ephod. Also Nob, the city of the priests, he struck with the edge of the sword both men and women, children and nursing infants, oxen and donkeys and sheep with the edge of the sword. Now one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And after Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the Lord's priests. So David said to Abiathar, "I knew that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, I have caused the death of all the priests of your father's house. Stay with me, do not fear, for he who seeks my life seeks your life, but with me you shall be safe."
Thank you. Wow. Saul is, I think he's reached not the all-time low, he's gonna actually get lower than this, but yeah, he's making good progress going on the downhill road, that's for sure. So verse 6, now Saul heard that David was discovered, and the men who were with him. Saul was sitting at Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the height, with his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing around him. So when Saul hears about this, he's under this tamarisk tree, and this is actually a fairly common thing. For whatever reason, these trees had some spiritual sense that, to some degree. The scripture never explains it. I don't know whether it was just like their culture that thought that. And his spear is in his hand. We read that throughout the chapter. That's Saul's thing. Most of the time when you read about Saul, he's got his spear in his hand. Whether he's in his house, outside, that's his sign of his kingship, as if that's his throne, so to speak. And all his servants, so all his cabinet members, so to speak, are standing around him. And Saul says to them that stood around him, now these are Benjaminites, okay? Saul is a Benjaminite. David is a Judite, or Judean. Two different tribes. So when we read this, hear that. So he says to the Benjaminites, hear now, O people of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? That all of you have conspired against me? So, first off, Saul thinks there's this big conspiracy. And there may have certainly been people who knew and didn't say anything, because they can see how unrighteous this pursuit of David is. But it's as if he's telling them, hey, he's not one of us. He's not going to reward you guys for what you're doing for him. You need to be loyal to me. We are of the same family. David's not going to, if he becomes king, you guys are getting nothing. No one discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. So Saul evidently had some information here, right? He knew somehow this is taking place. The word is getting out. Not one of you is sorry for me, or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait, as it is this day. Really? Is that what happened? Did Jonathan stir up David to injure his father? I mean, Saul is completely off base here. But then we have this foreigner, Doeg, the Edomite. So he is not an Israeli, or an Israelite, I guess is what they were called at this time. He's not an Israelite, and he doesn't quite have the same morals. And at this point, he is a chief shepherd, but here's a chance for him, as I see it, to maybe win some points with Saul, right? He doesn't fear the Lord. Just look, how he takes action. And do we remember who the Edomites were?
They were the second branch of the cursed son of
Abraham,
Abraham.
then Isaac.
Okay.
Isaac had two sons.
Esau.
Esau and Ishmael.
Esau and Jacob. The Edomites were from Esau, right? As you were saying. Yeah. So they are children of Abraham, but they're not the promised people. And notice Doeg's language. He doesn't call him by his first name. He says, I saw the son of Jesse. So he's using the same terminology as Saul here. I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. And sometimes there's little clues in the text that this shows you a perspective. Sometimes the perspective is going, sometimes the perspective is coming. And I noticed that your translation, when you read it, said going. I believe it did anyway.
Yeah.
It should say coming, because Doeg was in Nob and already, and David was going to Nob, but from Doeg's point of view, David is coming, right? So when you read, you can pick up sometimes on those subtleties and see where the point of view is coming and going. So he says, I saw him coming to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, and he inquired of the Lord for him. So we have a little bit more information. We didn't get that in the first part when we read of David's interaction with him. And he gave him provisions. Well, he gave him 5 loaves of bread, maybe, who knows, right? Maybe a couple more than that. And he gave him the sword of Goliath, the Philistine. Okay. So one of the things that I read, and I only have one reference to it, but it seems to be relatively important here, is that these priests who are inquiring of the Lord should have taken an oath to be loyal to the king. And because they're inquiring of the Lord for people, anything they hear that should or could be considered against the king, they should tell the king. Right? If they're the king's loyal subjects and they hear something, no matter what it is, it's their duty to tell the king. Now, they don't. And so I'm not justifying Saul's killing them. I'm just kind of explaining, probably from Saul's mind, you guys are treasonous in your actions. Whatever you do, you're supposed to inform me when there's anything because in inquiring, they're going to get the word. They're not going to inquire and say, Lord, speak to him, and then the Lord speaks directly to David. No, the Lord's going to speak to them, and then they're going to tell David. So they know what's going on at that point. How much the Lord revealed to them, who knows? But they don't tell the king. So the king sent then to summon Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house who were at Nob. And all of them came to the king. See, they're not afraid at this point. So they must not have known that David was fleeing from Saul. They just know that, whatever the Lord had told him, go, you're going to be safe, or whatever. It didn't reveal that there was a problem, because if there was a problem, I don't think all of them would have went to the king. Some of them would have went to the king, and the rest of them would have fled. It's still not cold enough. Mom, can you get that AC?
Because didn't David tell him that he was on a secret kind
Yeah.
of mission for
Yep.
the king?
Yeah. So he didn't know necessarily, Ahimelech didn't know all the details, and apparently the Lord didn't reveal all the details to him in the situation, because all of them then, when Saul says, bring your whole family, they come, every one of them, except for one. And so they do. And so verse 13, Saul says to him, immediately he says, now, son of Ahitub, and then he answers, here I am, my lord. He has no idea what's going on. And Saul says to him, why have you conspired against me? What? You and the son of Jesse, in that you have given him bread and a sword and inquired of God for him, so that he has risen against me, to lie in wait as it is this day. David's not lying in wait, he's fleeing, right? So there's a little bit of misinformation there. Then Ahimelech says to the king, and who among all of your servants is so faithful as David? So he justifies his actions, and I think rightly so. I think Ahimelech does a good job here. It says, why wouldn't I have done this? David is known to be your guy, married to your daughter, captain of your bodyguard. And further, he'll go on to say, in verse 15, is today the first time I have inquired of God for him? I've done this, who knows how many times. How is this, should this have triggered that something was going on? How was I to know anything? No, let not the king impute anything to his servant or to all his house, all the house of my father, for your servant has known nothing of this, much or little. Verse 16, and the king said, you shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house. So now the king is the unjust judge. Because basically this is a court situation. He's calling him to testify what happened. He's provided a reasonable defense. There is no evidence that he has done anything wrong other than the fact that what he did, but there's no evidence that he was in any type of conspiracy against the king, and the king then pronounces judgment on him. So again, we see Saul is unfit. He's unfit to govern the country. And the king, verse 17, said to the guard who stood about him, turn and kill him. Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David. And they knew that he fled and did not disclose it to me. But the servants of the king would not put out their hand to strike the priests of the Lord. So we have a little dissension here right in front of the king. His people are like, we ain't doing it. You know what? We fear you because you're a crazy man. We fear God more than we fear you, buddy. Right? But Doeg, unfortunately. So they wouldn't do it. And so verse 18, the king says, well, we got a foreigner here, let me try him. So the king says to Doeg, you turn and strike the priests. And Doeg the Edomite turned and struck down the priests, and he killed on that day 85 persons who wore the linen ephod, meaning that these were the priests. All 85 of them were in service to the Lord as priests. And the city of Nob, and Nob, the city of the priests, he put to the sword both man and woman, child and infant, ox, donkey, sheep, he put to the sword.
Wow.
We've seen this type of battles before. This is a holy war. It's as if Saul is declaring holy war on the Lord.
Yeah, but didn't God ask him to do that?
Exactly.
He didn't do it.
He said, go and do this thing. He couldn't do it then, but he's able to do it under his own anger for himself. Yeah. Verse 20. But one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. All right, let's take a quick look over at 1 Samuel chapter 2. We're going to go back a couple of weeks. 1 Samuel chapter 2. I'm just going to read a portion of it. This is when, in verse 27, it says, and there a man of God came to Eli and said to him, thus says the Lord. And then I'm going to drop down to verse 31. Behold, the days are coming when I will cut off your strength and cut off your father's house, so that there will not be an old man in your house. Then in distress you will look with envious eye on all the prosperity that shall be bestowed on Israel, and there shall not be an old man in your father's house. The only one of you whom I shall not cut off from my altar shall be spared to weep his eyes out and grieve his heart, and all the descendants of your house shall die by the sword of men. Did the Lord keep his promise? To the letter. Yeah. He keeps his promises.
Oh, so this is for Eli, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Verse 21. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. Now remember, whenever Saul has been confronted for something, how he responds. He responds by shifting blame, by finding somebody else who's responsible, right? when Samuel confronts him about the holy war that he was supposed to carry out, he says, they did this and they did that. Not that he, the king, was in charge, the men were in charge apparently. Look at David's response now. Verse 22, and David said to Abiathar, I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all these persons. Is it David's fault? It's not David's fault. But David takes responsibility for his part in it. Yeah. That's character. To be, the time that you don't want to say it's my fault is when your actions played a part in 85 priests and the whole entire town being murdered. You probably might want to keep that to yourself, right? And David doesn't do that. As hard as it is, he tells Abiathar, you know what? I'll take responsibility for that. I knew it. I knew when he was there. It is because of my actions that these men are dead. Stay with me, he tells him in verse 23. Do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life. With me you shall be in safekeeping. So Saul, doing all that he can to wipe out the priesthood, David, even though he is on the run, living who knows where at this point, some cave, David does what he can to preserve the priesthood. There's one man left, and David will keep him safe. And Abiathar plays an important role going forward as he inquires of the Lord for David as they go forward. Look at that. We still have minutes to spare. All right. We have any questions before we wrap up?